Good morning and welcome to The VUU. Hope things are going well where you are. I am in Austin, Texas, where it is uncharacteristically cold. I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford, and let's have all the other regulars introduce themselves.
I'm Hank Hurst, and I'm speaking to you from lovely, sunny Milton, Massachusetts. Here in my office, you can tell because I've got lots of books behind me, which make me look smart. I need all the help I can get.
You do. You look very smart. You can just see the knowledge pouring right from the books.
Hey!
I'm Meg Riley in Minneapolis. Let's see if this will work. Can you see it? It's snow here. That whiteness you see, that's what I'll be seeing for the next 5 months. It's 19 degrees and cold, but you know, at first it's really exciting here. By February I'm really crabby, but right now I'm pretty excited about it.
And I'm Tom Shade here in Ann Arbor, where it's about 28 degrees and clear. Well, oh my God, look, there's like a little blue in the sky. It's usually pretty dreary, but you know, today there's a little bit of sunshine. And I have all my books here too, but in order to keep anybody from borrowing them, I glue them down. So.
And does the dripping into your head with the knowledge work? Because, you know, I actually getting around to reading all of my books isn't happening.
I had a USB port put right back here, and so I just like
the Matrix,
download
right?
straight from the internet, right? So right now my brain is filled wall to wall, brim to brim with Kim Kardashian's rear end. So
I love that, yeah.
It's good to know. And we do have a special guest with us today, and we're going to be talking.
Speaking of Kim Kardashian's rear end.
See, how can you beat an introduction like that? The Reverend Dr. Daniel O'Connell from First VUU Houston is here, and later on in the show we're going to be talking about the VUU Voice for Justice, which just faced off against Westboro Church, and also doing multi-site. But first, with our regulars, what's going on in your towns?
Now we're serious.
Right now, my staff is coming in going, "What are you yelling about Kim Kardashian's rear end for in the church?"
Another day of ministry, right?
Well, it's the ministry of Milton. Every day someone's coming and going like, "What are you talking about? What?"
That's what they always said. That's what they always said. What are you talking about?
So
Exactly.
here in Minneapolis, we got.
Oh yeah.
You know, we got the pointing thing going on. It really is a tale of cops. I mean, you know, the mayor was out there with a guy who should be a role model for us, a guy who came out of jail, went to work in the community, got involved, got a job with Neighbors Organizing for Change, was doing voter registration, telling other people how he can't vote yet, but he's on the right track to vote, and meanwhile encouraging other people to vote, what a difference it makes. And you know, the head of the police union turned it into gang signals, which is ridiculous. I mean, what they cropped out is that the police chief was standing right there with them when this happened. And clearly they're down on the police chief, who's a Native American lesbian, and they're down on the mayor, who just demanded cameras and who said there are some bad apples. Given that the ACLU just did a report on Minneapolis saying that blacks are like 11 times more likely to be arrested for things like loitering. You know, there is a lot of investigation to be done, and clearly I hope this backfired. KSTP, where it aired, is owned by a very conservative right-wing group. In fact, when I called KSTP to complain, when it says hit 1 for this and 2 for that, it says hit 6 if you've called to report welfare fraud. So, so clearly, though they're not Fox News, they're about its equivalent here. But really, the news isn't really what scares me. It's the fact that the police union's leader is the one who told them that that was a real news story. That they reported it is ridiculous. But the really scary thing is that guy is running the police union. So here we are in Minneapolis. don't like being the laughing stock, but I'm really glad people are laughing at it because it brings people's attention to it. I was delighted that Jon Stewart talked about it last night. We've had different national media that's picked it up, and I was really glad because when it first came across, from the police brutality group that I'm in, I thought, I just keep thinking we've hit the bottom of stupid, and then it just gets stupider. So anyway, I'm glad that people are ridiculing it. So that's been big news. I'm going to go tonight to a meeting, the group that I've involved with here, and we're going to hear some young folks who've been down in Ferguson, hear what they've got to say as we get ready for that grand jury to speak. So it's not just Ferguson. That's the hashtag, but that's not the story.
Ah, yes. It's not just Ferguson. Are there a lot of people in Minneapolis who are preparing for the verdict?
Yeah, I think probably everywhere. Nobody is expecting Darren Wilson to be charged with anything. And while I read this morning on Facebook that the KKK is showing up in Ferguson, and I doubt they'll show up here right now, but there are people across the board who are getting ready for this, and I didn't mean to scare Daniel away.
What you did?
Sure, he came back. Oh, good. I didn't totally scare him away. Anyway, yeah, this group that I've become part of, which has been meeting for years, is being very loud, and now the mayor clearly is an ally, which is good. That you'll recall that the police chief didn't show up a few weeks ago or a month ago for a place where the community was going to talk about police brutality because the police chief said she was worried she'd be hurt, which just seemed preposterous, and the mayor had encouraged her not to show up. So this Pointergate has kind of realigned the mayor with the activists in kind of a good way, so which is good.
One thing that social media has given us, that there have been several examples of this over the last week or two. Another one is the Duggars, right? They issued a call for people to, for happily married couples to post pictures of themselves kissing on Twitter. And so a lot of lesbian and gay couples did as well. And I think they had also asked for this like on their Facebook page, and so then they were taking those couples down. Another example was in Houston. There was more than a week ago the I Stand Sunday, which was a group of fundamentalist religious conservatives coming in, and they had created this hashtag of I Stand Sunday, and they were preaching a lot of hate. And LGBT activists took it over and, using that same hashtag, were doing their own posting. But I'm just really interested in this idea of social media and ridicule, and, using ridicule as a form of pushing back at some of these things, whether it was Pointergate and the pictures that people were posting or any of these other things. It's a very interesting form of social witness, don't you think?
I've always loved ridicule. Bill Schultz, who was then the UUA president, ended up in Romania right after Ceausescu fell, and he said that the way that Ceausescu fell is that people started to laugh at him when he was saying really ludicrous things, and the whole crowd started to laugh. I mean, to me, that is like fabulous if you actually have the courage to laugh. Because Ceausescu had done stuff like take all the books out of the library except his wife's poetry. I mean, things that really, if they weren't so awful, would be funny because they're so preposterous.
There's a fantastic story, Meg, about the fall of Ceausescu, and it's sort of this one. It's the story of like one person making a difference, and it was all the other here we are like just celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down. But that this one fellow went to this giant rally. Everyone was bussed in to go to this rally, and where Ceausescu's speaking, all the other Eastern Bloc countries are falling, and he's just giving his regular old speech. And this guy starts chanting about some events in Timișoara, but the crowd was so geared to like we must chant whatever the government tells us to chant that they started hearing him chant stuff, and they thought, oh, this must be it. So they also started chanting stuff, and then he changes his chant to something else, and then people are trying to get away from him, and there's this whole sort of like kerfuffle, and the head of the Stasi comes over to Ceausescu and says like people are rioting, and the microphone's on, and that was basically it. Like from that point on, people were like, what? Oh, and like because everyone in the country was watching this, and everyone just kind of went in, and that was it. And within 48 hours, Ceausescu and his wife were dead, and but it's the power of that one guy who's still active in politics in Romania.
Really?
But part of it was people like laughing and kind of going like, "This is ridiculous,"
That guy is still around doing stuff?
Yeah. I'll do a little research and
I'd love to know what he did after that.
But you have to make the point of it can go the other way too. Howard Dean's famous scream that wasn't even a scream, but that killed the political. I mean, it didn't kill the political career. He's still on, but in terms of the trajectory he was on, it killed any chance of him ever being considered a serious candidate, and they still bring that up. So
look at Tom Cruise jumping on the couch.
Right. Right. Of course, in Tom Cruise's case, you might say, well, maybe that was when we started looking a little bit closer. Or on a more serious note, gosh, I can't remember his name, but that comedian who recently started telling the truth about Bill Cosby.
Yes.
He had that as part of his comedy routine. It seems like that just opened the door for everyone to really begin talking about, what do we do with our heroes when they have, feet of pretty serious clay.
Yeah, pretty serious, yeah. Yeah, that's it. Well, I think social media is just a total game changer. With all of it, and we have yet to. I mean, he said it a while ago, Clay Shirky, but he said now's the interesting time with it because it's ubiquitous. So now that everybody's using social media, now the culture of what it means gets created. And now's the time to really help shape that culture. And I know Sean Dennison has said a number of times that he thinks Unitarian Universalists should be part of creating kindness and compassion, that kind of the call-out culture, that young people, like my 18-year-old, really think is normal, where you just like directly head at anybody who's making you mad. There is another way to communicate that might be more useful if what we actually want is for people to listen to us.
Great point. Well, I know that social media has been a big part of the plan for the UU Voice for Justice in Houston. And so first, Reverend O'Connell, who I spent the last 2 years working with and for. Tell us a little bit about the UU Voice for Justice.
Okay, so we were at one of those meetings a few years ago where they bring in ministers and lay leaders from a metro area, and they say, you guys don't really do much stuff together. You're doing stuff within your own church, and you're doing some stuff in the say disadvantaged communities that happen to be geographically close to you. But what is it that we could all do together? And so we had the executive director of the UUMA, the UUMN, and Loretta there through a really bizarre set of circumstances involving a contest and so forth and money. But anyway, there they were in Houston, and there we were all together. And so I recalled an idea that we had done back when I was in Danbury, Connecticut, which was called a rapid response network. And at the time, there were some people who were defacing synagogues. It looked to be mostly small-scale vandalism stuff, but there was a new rabbi in town, and so he used this as an opportunity to bring in the other liberal clergy to talk, and so we created this rapid response network. And so I brought this idea up. I think you were probably at the table with some other ministers, and we talked it over. And there were other ideas that people brought up, but they really liked this one for a variety of reasons. And so there were a couple of things that I wanted to do with this. Number one, there was an incident that happened pretty quickly after I got to Houston where a transgender city employee, a woman, used the wrong restroom and was arrested by city police on city property, even though there was a city regulation saying that people could pick their own restroom. So remember, this is back in 2010. This is not, yesterday or this year. And so the press went to the executive director of the Houston Pastors Association, and they got a quote from him how horrible this was, and there were perverts in restrooms and all the rest of that stuff that you can imagine. And you and I, yeah, it was immediately afterwards.
Okay.
And so we managed to get, and Joanna actually did a lot of legwork on this. We got about 17 fairly liberal to moderate clergy sign a letter that went to the Houston Chronicle, but by then it was 4 days late, and the news cycle had moved on to something else. And so once again, what happens is there's an incident that happens, something that we would have a distinctive voice on, and we didn't get heard because we weren't organized. And the average person looking around in Houston, the fourth largest city in the United States, says, oh, I know what religion is. It's evangelical Christianity, it's right-wing Christianity, and it's very politicized. And so it occurred to me that really the only thing we could do was to go ahead and get organized. And so what were we going to do? So we decided we were going to be set up to rapidly respond, like within a matter of hours, on 3 key issues. And I wanted to pick low-hanging, I wanted to pick things that I was willing to stick my neck out for, and have people say, well, I'm going to quit your church if you stick your neck out for that. So basically what we picked was women's reproductive health, LGBTQ issues, and interfaith pluralism. And so what we did was we researched the issues, we looked up all the UUGA resolutions that had been done over the years, we wrote position papers, we got a bunch of media training from people in the media, we began to develop relationships, we learned how to write media advisories as opposed to press releases and all that sort of stuff. And then on National Coming Out Day, we had our big coming out as an organization. And we also, this is pretty much a minister-led organization, although the leadership team is probably half ministers, half lay people. And what it's done is it's overcome some of the competition that existed between the ministers and the congregations in the Houston area, which is something that most ministers never want to talk about, but is real. It's a fact, I think, in pretty much every metro area where there are UU ministers. It's overcome that, and it's given us practice each time. And so we heard that the Westboro Baptist folks were going to come to Houston. They were going to picket 3 places. 2 were pretty conservative churches that they felt were not conservative enough, which was kind of ironic. And then the 3rd one was City Hall. And Joanna mentioned the I Stand event, and we also had an event there. But each time we get a little bit more media savvy. And there was a lot of discussion about whether to show up to counter-protest the Westboro Baptist, because after all, aren't we bringing them attention by doing that? Maybe the best thing to do would be to, ignore it altogether. There are other liberal clergy who said, who are not UUs, who said, well, we're not going to do it because we've got a big crop walk that day, and we would rather live out our values that way than bring any attention to the Westboro Baptist. And so as it happened at the 2 churches, so we had people at all the events, and we have this fairly straightforward system where we can send out mass text messages that people have to opt into. And everyone's had training, and everyone knows, okay, if a reporter comes to you, that's the spokesperson over there. So we've gone through that drill a number of times. And do we sing or not? But if our singing isn't like great, maybe we shouldn't sing. And do we chant? But we don't want to be a bunch of chanters. So we've gone through that whole cooperative community process, but with ministers leading it, and that's really turned out quite well. So we weren't sure about Westboro Baptist, but we said, you know what?
Hold on, I just have to ask you, what does it mean to be a bunch of chanters?
Well, like chanting, like,
you wouldn't want to be a bunch of chanters. You'd look like...
Stand on the side of love. Stand on the side of love.
It would be a political thing. It wouldn't be that you looked like, I don't know, Hare Krishnas or something.
Right.
Okay, got it. I didn't know if it was political or religious. Got it.
Right. So we decided, at least it'll be good exercise for us, and if we don't get other liberal clergy, that's okay. We just need to do this until we really get used to it, so we can have a sense of ease in front of the cameras and so forth. Well, what we found out is that the media wasn't all that excited about covering it in the first place until they found out that we were going to show up. Now there's going to be something interesting to see. And so at the two churches, there were 4 Westboro Baptist people and 20 UUs from all the congregations in Houston in their yellow shirts. Now, and they're all standing in a line, right? And there's my spouse, Reverend Bonnie Vijard, with her white cane because she's legally blind. And so in terms of a picture, this is like perfect. And so the media loved it. And so we got Channel 11, we got a Spanish language station, Channel 45. We got all kinds of great coverage, and I immediately put it out on Facebook and the regular social media channels. And it really made our folks in Houston, UUs, whether they were part of the Voice for Justice or not, feel like they belonged to a social justice movement bigger than themselves. No. And one of the things we've discovered is people sometimes, especially in an urban church like ours, they join, to have friends and so forth, but because they don't want to do social justice alone. So when you form an organization like this, it does several different things. And frankly, I think this model could be repeated at any major metropolitan area. You get to work with people, you get to make a voice, you get to let people in the wider community know, especially in a town like Houston, that there's not just one religious voice. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that we do is like, well, how are we going to appeal to people in the middle? Like, who could ever be in the middle about women's reproductive health? But we've got the people, we've got our choir, and we can preach to them. And we know that the people who are always going to be against women's reproductive health issues are probably going to be unchangeable. But there's this theoretical group that hasn't made up their mind. So how do we appeal to them? So my kind of latest thinking about that is, this country isn't just one religion, right? It's multiple religions. We're not just a Christian nation. And so we talk about religious liberty. And for some reason, that really seems to get those people in the middle who would really not agree with us on almost anything else. But when we lift up America and religion and religious liberty and don't let one religion dominate, that seems to have some traction. So we were quite pleased with what happened with Westboro folks, and we almost didn't do it. So we've learned a lot of lessons in the last few actions.
And that's really interesting that you're focusing on religious liberty, because the far right religious leaders are also co-opting those terms and saying that they are for religious liberty. In fact, the I Stand Sunday, that was a huge part of their talking points, because of the ministers who had been subpoenaed in reaction, by the way, to their lawsuit. But those were the words that they kept saying was, religious liberty, religious liberty.
But I think if you take it from say the average person in the street, and the person on the religious right is saying, my personal religious liberty is being infringed because these other people are acting in a way contrary to my religion. Okay, take that. Now you take what we're saying on the religious left is our country was founded on the principle. Our founders said dominant religious viewpoint, and that's what these people are trying to do. I think that's a much stronger argument than the religious right can make. And I think we sometimes give ground too easily to them to let them define terms like religious liberty or what a family is and all the rest of it. And it's up to us to kind of claim that.
How have you seen that work? I'm curious, is it in personal conversations, or where have you seen that? Because I actually haven't had any luck with that line of conversation. So I'm interested where you've seen conservative people embrace that.
Embrace the idea of religious liberty?
Yeah, diversity of religion should mean that people who are pro-choice aren't in...
Oh, well, no, the people on the religious right are not going to embrace that at all. They're
talking about the movable middle.
Yeah.
And, that's interesting. I just for the last 5 days had as a house guest Carrie Knox, who's the president of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. Okay. And we were talking about what kind of messaging works, and I was saying, it's just too abstract. I think it needs to have a heart. I think there needs to be a story, like with marriage equality, it was about couples and love, and we stopped the civil marriage as a civil right and all of that kind of abstract language, and I don't know what the right language is. I feel like we're all looking, so I think Harry Knox would like to know if this is working. He's really in the process of discerning and talking to people, and And it may be that in different parts of the country, different kinds of language works.
Right.
I would imagine that where the religious right is more aggressive, that people in the middle, there are a lot of people in the middle who feel personally pushed by them in their personal life or in their family, and who resent that. And that may be a motivation in the middle, that people see them as, their cousin who is always on their case about, this, that, or the other thing. And, people generalize from their personal situations a lot, and naming that about them may be something that works in the middle. But,
yeah.
Again, we have to, get over the idea that we're ever going to persuade them to be different than what they are. It's really, we're always talking to the middle.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is that here in Harris County, we're adding 1,000 jobs a month. And so you have this area of the country that's pretty conservative, and yet all these people are coming in, and they're engineers, they're oil contractors, they're people who are working in environmental sciences, and they're coming from everywhere. They're coming from Michigan, Massachusetts. They're coming from wherever they're coming from. Chances are it's from a lot more liberal place. And the other thing is that down here in Houston, it is a church culture. And so one of the questions in St. Louis, they say, where'd you go to high school? In Houston, they say, where do you go to church? And if you don't have a good answer, you're going to get invited over and over again. So people are looking. And the other thing is that with the demographics, including the decline of the majoritarian Anglo population, there's kind of a sea shift, and it does have people asking fundamental questions that they didn't really ask before.
Daniel, I see that we have a question of who led the training for the UU Voice for Justice? Who all was involved in that?
So we did have a Episcopal priest come to talk to us in the beginning, Reverend Carissa Baldwin. And we had a pretty elaborate scheme of trainers we were going to get to come in, and we were going to communication training, and we were going to get some media training. And that's pretty much not what happened. So we got some phone advice. I went somehow through some odd series of circumstances. I was invited to a weekend training in Austin, Texas, that was hosted by Catholics for Choice and their executive director. And they did a fantastic training. I'd say if you had to pay for this training, it'd be like $4,000 for the weekend. And they had cameras come in, and they just ran us through stuff. And it was mostly about women's reproductive health in general and talking to the press about abortions in particular. And in Texas, as you may know, all these clinics have been shut down and just on and on and on. So I got some training that way. Some other people got some additional training. And one of our, I have a student minister who's working for me half-time for 2 years, and his wife works in PR and knows media people, and so we did what we call a mock action. So we had cameras, and we had the tough questions thrown at us, and we just repeated that a couple of times and got ourselves to the point where, okay, we think we can do this.
That's fabulous. And
yeah.
I mean, it's just really exciting to hear about that. Makes me think at the beginning of Standing on the Side of Love, Helio Fred Garcia, media genius, did training for about 100 clergy. We did one in Dallas. We did them all over different regions. You weren't in Dallas then, Daniels. But, but there are people in Texas who took it, and those skills, once you have them, you've got them, and it really helps you. I mean, I could hear when you were talking that you really knew how to frame the story so the media would bite. And
yeah, and you know what? The other thing for me was, our colleague in Dallas at the First Unitarian Church of Dallas was walking some children from one building to the RE building, and across the street there were a couple of guys with cameras, and they were also holding up pictures of aborted fetuses, and they were yelling out to these children, why do you go to a church where your parents condone the killing of children? So Cantor, the minister, goes over and engages these people. Why are you doing this? This is horrible. These are school children. And they just shoot right back because they're prepared for this. And then he later goes to the police department and says, can't this stop? And they're saying, nope, but they're totally allowed to do it. And frankly, some of us agree with it. So this was like a giant wake-up call. The worst part, though, two worst parts. Worst part number one was those of us who saw this YouTube video, there but for the grace of God go I. Because he wasn't prepared for that, right? Why would he think to be? And bad point number 2, they put this on YouTube and they used it for fundraising. Apparently they go around the country and they go to clergy people and they poke them and they pray that the clergy person will get so angry that they'll take a swing at him. And boy, then they're going to raise millions of dollars. So that was a big wake-up call.
So what's next for the Voice for Justice?
Well, we're doing a little bit of debriefing. We find some people say, oh, I don't want a text message alert. I want an email alert. Oh, I don't want an email alert. I want a voicemail alert. So we're handling that. Mostly we're ginning up excitement. Particularly, we've had a long dormant group of people who've been very involved in social justice at their local church, but really want to get our name out to people in Houston that there's an alternative view. And these people, they are just excited, and for good reason. So we have to go from, okay, we're inventing everything for the first time, to, hey, let's write a playbook. Let's make sure everything is more or less standardized, and let's be out on the alert for, again, we don't know when tragedy is going to strike. We don't know when the next gay teen is going to get beat up, or the Texas legislature is going to do something about women's health clinics. But we've got the process in place where we have a leadership team that makes the decision. We have text messages that go out and so forth. And then as this goes on, we're continuing to develop media context. Right now, there's a woman at the Houston Chronicle who gets different people to write about different stuff, and so I'm writing something for her about a little more than once a month. And so now the name Unitarian Universalist is getting in the paper. So I think we're just going to try and continue to build on the stuff that we're doing. At this point, we're sticking with those 3 issues. We may broaden that depending on what happens. But we want to be ready. We want a position paper, all that.
You should do a webinar on this and teach other people how to do it. You know, I'm sure Standing on the Side of Love would love to host such a thing. If they don't, CLF would. I mean, just talk about how you do the texting, what platform you use. Really talk people through tactically how to do it, and also share the more strategic thinking. I mean, it's really exciting to hear what you're saying.
Good, good. Well, there are a lot of people here who are really excited about it. They've been wanting something like this for a long time, and there was a lot of, frankly, initial resistance, particularly among the ministers, who's, basically the unarticulated thing that they might have said is, hey, my congregation is not paying me to do this. I am 125% busy already, and now you want me to, prepare these position papers. Oh, and you're just going to call me up in the middle of the night, and I got to go show up at City Hall and have cameras up my nose, including Fox News. It's a good idea, but maybe next year in Jerusalem we can do that. So what we did, the key thing what we did is we said, we're going to have a press conference on October 11th, National Coming Out Day, and we're going to talk about why we exist and what we're here for. And that day is going to come ready or not. Just like those of you who are preachers, Sunday comes, ready or not. You tell people you're going to be there, well, then you'll figure out a way to do the necessary homework.
Sounds good. And I see we are in the middle of our hour. So before we get into talking about multi-site, let me go around and have everyone reintroduce themselves for those who have just joined us. I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford in Austin, Texas.
And I'm Tom Shade in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
I'm Hank Purse, speaking to you from Milton, Massachusetts.
Meg Riley in beautiful, sunny, cold Minneapolis.
Daniel O'Connell here in pretty cold Houston, Texas.
And does our chalice person want to come out behind the chalice and say hello? Running tech for us as always.
Good morning, Bob LaValle calling from Buffalo, New York, where we had our first snow of the winter. This is a very exciting moment for us.
I bet. So, Daniel, what you are also doing there in Houston is multi-site ministry. What is multi-site ministry, and what does it look like there?
Okay, so this is another reason why I love Houston, because the people here are so entrepreneurial. So I was asked to give a talk on this multi-site concept by a guy named Joe Sullivan, who'd been the president of the district down here. Now he's the district executive up in, I think, New Hampshire. And so we talked about the healthy communication team model, I talked a little bit about the creative team model, and I talked about multi-site, which is something I've been studying for quite a while back when I was a minister in St. Louis, but it didn't seem like it would be a good idea in St. Louis, mostly for the you can't plant churches near my church competition kind of reasons that we generally don't like to talk about. But I went to this meeting, and these two people said, we're pretty interested in it, and they had a lot of questions. And so I kind of answered those questions. And we engaged in a series of talks, and one thing led to another, such that January of this year, the Northwest Community Unitarian Universalist Church dissolved their charter, and all of their members joined First UU Church of Houston en masse. As of July 1st, that same thing happened with the Henry David Thoreau congregation in Stafford, Texas. They dissolved their charter, and they all joined our church en masse. So right now, we are one church in 3 locations.
How's that working?
Well, there was a little bit more administrative headache than people anticipated, but really only the staff and I kind of noticed that. The big change, there's several gigantic changes. Number one, the people at the fellowships can stop looking for speakers, and we use that term speakers loosely. A lot of the times those speakers weren't frankly, they were mediocre to not very good, and newcomers would come, and even if there had been maybe a quarter-time minister, whenever they came, the minister was never there. It was just the people who did come, there was a high percentage of charter members. So they'd been there 15, 16, 17 years. They'd already invited all their friends, and they weren't getting a lot of new people coming in the door. And both of these congregations were desperate enough to consider doing something pretty radical that would allow them to achieve a level of success that had been unavailable to them for as many years. And so now the level of worship and programming and everything else has changed dramatically. Even though there's a quarter-time minister at one location, they're there almost every Sunday because of our creative team model. So the minister's always there. There's a face with the place. In fact, Joanna, you had this role not that long ago. Not only that, but there's giant cost savings that get to be involved. For example, when we told Church Mutual that we were merging with this other congregation, they charged us as one congregation in more than one place rather than separate congregations. That saved $6,000 a year. Just that one thing. When you merge, there are other.
Now you're talking. Wait a minute. Now you're talking.
That's right. That's right. And the thing is that the thought occurred to me that my congregation, but before we even got started, is already paying me and my staff hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, every year after year after year, to produce new content. How hard would it be to scale and replicate that at another location? Right? And now, before you had 3 different congregations with 3 different ideas about how to collect money, how to store it, how to save it, how to spend it, with wildly varying degrees of expertise in any one of those areas. Okay, well, I'm lucky enough, I have a bookkeeper who's been doing this professionally for 25 years, right? And so she knows how to fill out the tax forms that maybe the volunteer treasurer in one year missed and so forth. So the back of the house and the front of the house, all of that stuff has now just been raised up. One of the congregations had lost half their membership in a year. The other had lost half their membership in 4 years, largely through factors completely outside of their control. And so in this last year, that precipitous membership decline has stopped, and they're at a plateau. So our next challenge is going to be how do we get new people in those doors, especially at the satellite locations where they've already invited all their friends.
Have any of the people from the downtown church gone to the suburban ones, or are they all settled where they are? Have you seen anybody moving from branch to branch?
Oh yeah. And not only moving by self-motivation, but we also send teams. So we send our welcome team at the museum district out to the other locations. They send their welcome team or their membership team or their social justice team. And then we have big events, like we have a big music workshop, and people from all of the choirs and all the musicians come to one location and we run stuff. So we do a lot less of the send people to leadership school model, and instead it's less expensive and far more impact to bring those leaders into our location, and then we can get 50, 60, 75 people to that leadership experience rather than sending, say, 4 away on a week-long thing. So there's all kinds of stuff that we've had to ask and reinvent. Like, what are the core ministries that we have to keep? What kind of branding are we going to insist on for the whole church versus local variation at the campus? And then the three big
campuses have similar theologies. Were they? I mean, was there stress around kind of the theological content at all, or were they all similar?
Zero stress around that. Absolutely none. In fact, one of them had to give up Joys and Concerns. We thought that was going to be a big issue. Not a big issue at all. The huge issue is that the smaller satellites went from being a lay-led congregation to being a minister-led congregation with policy governance. So that means basically you're going to give up control over pretty much all the important decisions except for hiring and firing the senior minister or buying and selling real estate. So there's 3 main concerns where we're afraid we're going to get lost in the big church. We're not sure if we're going to like video sermons. And 3, we've got a designated fund for our future building because all these places want their own minister and they want their own building. Give us some assurances about that. So we wrote some of our governance documents, and we've got one person from each location on the board guaranteed. And the rest of it has just basically been, you're going to take me on as your senior minister, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that you thrive and not just survive. And by the way, nobody at my church was asking me to do this. There's like, well, aren't you going to be our minister, or are you going to be their minister now? So we've had a lot of time to work through a lot of that, and I think basically everybody think it's successful. There's some big challenges. The main challenge for me is I gotta do marketing. I gotta do direct marketing. I'm probably gonna have to do direct mail. I'm gonna have to do targeted social media stuff in order to get people in. And this is like cutting edge stuff. There's only a couple people that I know about in the UUA who are even beginning just now to start to do this. But I think if we can, we've really like solved some problems. With the Voice for Justice, we've solved the problem, I think, about how we get multiple UU congregations to finally work together in concert en masse. That's great. Another fundamental problem with smaller congregations, remember 75% of UU congregations are 150 or less, is families come in, they don't see other kids in the RE program, and they leave. How can we build up our RE program when we don't have kids to begin with? It's a catch-22. So we've got some ideas about that we're working on. But the real big nut to crack is, can we actually successfully bring people in? Because right now, it's a miracle newcomers show up in the first place, right? I mean, at least at our church, we rely entirely on people who have been members 2 years or less to invite their friends. And miraculously, it works to some degree. Imagine if we could really reach out to people in a particular way and they were actually, people who didn't know anybody who showed up for church at the first time. I think that's kind of the next frontier for us.
There's marketing, but this also ties back to the other story, because there's earned media. There's
right
seeing you in the community and going, who are those people? I want to go
exactly.
So I as the person who watched Bill Singford spend $1 million on marketing in Time magazine and said, why don't we do something different? Why don't we show people who we are and then develop the Standing on the Side of Love campaign? I actually think we stand to bring in a lot more people that other way. So I think using the first story to leverage the second one is a winning combo for you.
Yeah, I totally agree, but I wouldn't agree with the idea that what Singford and the UUA did was what I would call marketing. I would say that was advertising, which was very different. When we had GA in St. Louis in 2006, the UUA spent $10,000 on an advertising campaign. So big color ads in the newspaper, some radio spots.
Billboards. Right.
And how many people did it bring in? 0. So that's advertising. You put a picture of a Toyota truck in a Life magazine, and you have no idea whether anybody's going to buy trucks based on that. What I'm talking about is measurable stuff, where you can put stuff out there and you can find out how many people opened it up, how many people looked at. I can put an ad in Facebook right now. I haven't done it yet. I can target people who live within 10 miles of the church who identify as liberal, interested in parenting, and highbrow, right? So this would be golden for us. And if I keep aiming at those people and I develop sermon series to help them deal with their nightmares and their felt needs around things like what we've already been talking about, then those people might get the courage to come to church for the first time. So I'm just thinking.
Absolutely. And you know, Google AdWords, Google has a nonprofit thing where they'll give you free access to AdWords, so apply for that.
Oh, I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So Dan, can you talk a little, and you know, I mean, this is all really exciting, but there's a part of me that also wants to know, like, what does Sunday morning look like in these other churches? So certainly there's a video of you doing your sermon, but what about, like, hymns? Does everyone just kind of, like, is your whole service just played and everyone just watches, or is just your sermon played, or so can you just walk me a little bit through that? What that would be like if I was a visitor coming to one of the satellite churches.
All right, great question. And in fact, I was preaching down in Galveston, and they said, "Oh, you know, you're the best minister we've ever had." I'm probably like one of 3 that they've ever had, but you know that's okay. And they said, can you come down here more? I said, yeah, you could probably have me like once a month. And they're like, how would that work? And then I concept. And they're like, I'm not sure how that works. So one of the things that we discovered was that the satellites down at Thoreau and up at Copperfield, they were already using projectors and screens for hymn lyrics, for announcements, sometimes for an illustration, and so forth. So they were very comfortable with the general idea. But part of the way this works is that at each location, pretty much every Sunday, there is a bona fide UU minister who is the face with the place. They're pretty much always there. They run the whole service with the exception of the sermon, but that's not every week. So the way we work this is, up at Copperfield, they have a quarter-time minister. So that person preaches live once a month. At Thoreau and Stafford, they have a half-time minister. That person preaches live twice a month. The other Sundays, they have usually me, sometimes somebody else on the screen. But because we have like 4 or 5 ministers in 3 locations, we also can do some rotation. So one of the things, we have a big music service coming up. I'm going to preach that on December 7th. Then I'm going to go out to Thoreau and do the same service on the 14th, and then up at Copperfield on the 21st. So again, it's one of those situations where they're going to get this fantastic choral piece. We've contracted with Elizabeth Alexander, who's writing a choral piece, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, with musical instruments on the 6 sources. So we're going to have the world premiere sometime in the spring. But that's stuff that we can do together that would have been very difficult to do individually. But to get more to your point, Hank, basically you would come in, you're going into this place that looks like it's an industrial park from the outside, but you get inside and it's a UU church, and there's comfortable chairs, there's a chalice, there's an altar, all that sort of stuff. There's smiling greeters. You go in, and there's a screen in the back, but the screen is just kind of the background. There'll be a slide saying, here's the big idea, or our service is about to begin. Whenever there's anybody speaking, there's nothing on that slide, and your attention's directed to the speaker. And again, you have a UU minister who's leading, and then when it comes time for the sermon, up it'll be on the screen, and as soon as the sermon is done, it's off again, and the minister is leading the service. And it was one of those things that people were apprehensive about, but the way I kind of described it to the folks in Galveston, and I'm kind of overdoing it to make a point, was I could get you live in person, the under vice secretary of the Democratic Party of Galveston County, or I could get you Barack Obama on the screen. Which would your folks rather see, right? So generally, the quality of worship that these congregations have been able to afford hasn't been very good because they didn't have the resources to do it. And so we've got a bench of preachers, right? It's not just me. We've got a bench, and we have different preachers with different pitches and different ways of looking at the world. And because we work on all our sermons together, which is a whole other thing.
Wow, yeah.
Every Tuesday when I'm preaching, I bring a draft of my sermon in, and all the rest of the ministers critique it. And that's a little tough at first, but the other feedback I've gotten from people in the pews is that all of our sermons are better because of it. So that.
No, we do that at CLF too.
Okay, good.
Because we videotape, so we run videos by, and I mean, this week I'm redoing. People are not afraid to say no, and it's a fabulous thing. By the time you do it, you don't feel alone with it. The ones that you're like, I don't know about this, you get feedback like, well, you really shouldn't do it, or it's great, just be brave here. So, yeah, Bob's saying, welcome to my world. But
Okay.
it's for we have fellows, but it's also for Lynn Unger and me, who are the regular ministers. People have the right to say no, that's not good, and it's it's fabulous. It takes the loneliness out of preaching. I mean, how many times have I stood up, kind of wondering, by myself in that pulpit? And my cousin, who's a Presbyterian, sends out her sermons every Tuesday to a big interfaith group. My father, who was a rabid atheist, and me, and kind of always pushing on social gospel, and Episcopal friends, and it was really interesting to see everyone's feedback on that. And I just thought, in this age of collaboration, preachers in a way are way too lonely a lot of the time. A lot of us are.
I'm hoping that I've encouraged Daniel. I've said that the multi-site is great and all that, but write something more about that too. I think that this is a conversation that a lot of people want to have. I'm lucky to be part of a Facebook group of other ministers who are in preliminary fellowship, and we're not to the point where we're sharing sermons, but we are often the week before, messaging to each other and, hey, do you have a reading that fits this particular thing? And kind of, complaining and goading each other on of, okay, who's finished their sermon? And it's great. The idea of not being able to connect with others who are doing this work, because I started out at the CLF, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So many ministers at churches of 150 to 250, and there's this model of you go off and you have the religious text in one hand and the newspaper in the other hand, and you pass your own experiences through the fire of thought, and you run this marathon until you get to Sunday morning, and you deliver it maybe once, and then you have a little bit of time off, and then rinse and repeat. And especially for newer ministers, I remember when they would say, well, Daniel, how do you come up with your sermon ideas? It's like desperation, Sunday comes, ready or not.
I think especially since people are using theme-based preaching now, people are collaborating with each other. I've noticed churches, where was it that I was really inspired by the level to which they're collaborating, so that they're all, well, Philadelphia was doing it a few years ago, but some other cluster where they're all building web stuff together on the themes. And that's really cool. I mean, we're in a new age, and like what you're talking about with administrative costs and all of that, that just seems like what it's time for everybody to look at. I mean, for so many things that everybody, it's kind of like co-housing where everybody has their own lawnmower. Like, instead you share tools. I mean, it just makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and I do have some sabbatical time that's actually available in the spring, and I've been thinking about maybe doing an ebook or something on one of these concepts. I think the creative team concept could really be useful for for a group of ministers who kind of knew each other in seminary and say, hey, I have to make a commitment to work with you guys on this, and let's pick some themes. It really multiplies your results in the pulpit, is my experience.
And I have to say, from when I was in Houston, one of the other aspects that I liked about it was that it was mostly ministers, just because that's the bulk of the team there, but it was also a professional religious educator, Carol Burris, and having a DRE come in with that particular perspective, especially because all of the work is integrated. The sermons feed the religious education, which feeds the small groups. I just thought that was really valuable.
Yeah, I did too, and it's, Carol's really experienced, and so the other thing that we do is we research a topic, and we have more material that we can use, so that's great. So some of that material we then put into our adult faith formation program, which is where the religious educator comes in, and so it's like when you have 4 people studying for the same test together rather than you having to do all the work on your own. It's great.
So, what has been the biggest challenge in putting together the multi-site?
It's really a lot of one of the biggest challenges has been a lot of the administrative stuff. For example, we still have people who are handling the collection in ways that we don't really like at one of the other locations, and so we kind of, how do we do that gently? I think we've handled the issue of them feeling lost pretty well. I've invited team leaders from the other locations to my house, and we've had meetings and stuff like that. When we've done leadership development training, we do a big thing in the fall. We get 50 leaders together, and we run people through stuff. And especially the people at the smaller locations, they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and they're being reached out to. So that's been fairly big, the administrative part of it. But the biggest challenge now, frankly, is getting new people into the satellites and really kind of taking them to the next level. We've stopped the precipitous downward slide. They were afraid that they were going to run out of money and they were going to run out of people in a couple of years. That's one of the things that made them desperate enough to consider this move.
Sorry, I just, for all of the everybody goes through about, these times religiously, that desperate enough to change thing, I think, has so much excitement for all of us that people who have been unwilling to change forever go, well, oh my God, we could actually die if we don't. And so, I'm really heartened by the lack of, the administrative stuff sounds like a hassle, but so manageable compared to intractable people who won't change. That really is a heartening story.
Yeah, that's the part that really surprised me, is that some of the people at the smaller congregations where it was entirely lay-led, and they're making all these decisions about paint on color on the wall and all that sort of stuff. It's like they embrace policy governance 100%. Oh, so Daniel and his team are going to make these decisions? Thank God. Now I can go, to do that social justice project I wanted to do. They just I was expecting a lot of resistance to that, but zero. And those people who are on our board of trustees, they are 100%. Yeah, this is great. This is how it should be.
I love it. Yay!
That's really an interesting shift. Why do you think that happened in the last 5 years? Because 5 years ago, that would have been, you would have had a different experience. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
no, I think you're right about it. I think it had to do with the fact that maybe 10%, not even 20%, but maybe 10% of the people were doing all the work. And they're in a rental facility, and they're setting up RE, and they're taking down RE, and what program are we going to do this year? And we need a speaker for that 4th Sunday. Oh, I don't really want to get the Audubon Society again. That person was boring. But we have to, Sunday comes, ready or not. So it was just this tremendous sense of relief. Plus, they knew that if they joined with us, that means I am responsible for their health and well-being, and they're thriving as a congregation. That's going to become part of my job. And otherwise, they would never have gotten that.
Yeah, and I think it's also quality, too. I think that's the other thing, too, that people see, is that they get to take part in this quality event and program, and that they get to own it too. So it's not just like we're buying this; it's like we're part of this too.
Right.
Well, and having somebody fabulous like Joanna there, I'm sure didn't hurt a bit either. And I know there was another minister in the other satellite. Having a real person who was there, who they could feel. Yeah. Well, that's huge. What do you keep calling a face in the place?
Yeah. The face with the place.
Face with the place. I like
that.
Because,
not to diss my part-time colleagues, but there are some part-time colleagues who are part-time for a reason. Who am I going to get to move to Stafford, Texas for a quarter-time ministry position, right? It's got to be somebody pretty desperate who's probably looking to move on as soon as they possibly can. But this model, I can have somebody who's quarter time at one location, but who is half time at a different location and quarter time somewhere else. So now we can construct a position and get a quality person in that otherwise we would never have been able to fill.
Amen. Well, I know we're hitting the top of the hour. Joanna, thanks for running the show today. I appreciate it.
You bet. And thank you, Daniel, for joining us.
Yeah,
You
thanks.
bet.
Any last words from our regulars?
It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, it is exciting stuff, and lots of ideas coming out of it, I think, which will hopefully pour over into the rest of the UUA. I'm here in New England where there are lots of little churches struggling, and I kind of go, why struggle? So, to share the wealth.
All right, next week we got Mark Morrison Reed coming to talk about Selma. So,
Super.
see you then.
All right. Peace, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.